Morning unwrapped itself over the hills of Judah like a soft shawl, but the valley below was anything but gentle. Two slopes faced each other like stubborn kings, one bristling with Israelite tents, the other with Philistine spears. Between them lay a strip of ground the Hebrews called Elah, a place where echoes carried and hearts could falter. Every day a voice rolled up from the Philistine line deep as a drum, proud as a trumpet hand. The echo of it made men stare at their boots. "Choose a man and have him come down to me," the giant would shout, the words marching across the valley as if they too wore armor. "If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." He ended with a sneer, "This day I defy the armies of Israel." His name was Goliath of Gath, and he was the kind of man other men described in measurements. How many cubits tall? How many shekels of bronze? His armor flashed like a second sunrise. His spear shaft looked like the beam of a loom, and the iron point alone was heavier than most boys. When he moved, the ground seemed to understand and get out of his way. When he laughed, it sounded like a door slamming. On one such morning, a boy came from the hills, not with a sword but with bread. David, son of Jesse, had left his father's sheep in the care of another, and hurried to the front with roasted grain and loaves for his brothers, and a gift of cheese for their commander. He came with the smell of pasture still on his cloak, the quiet rhythm of sheep bells still in his ears. The valley's noise met him like a wall. He followed the clatter to the battle line and arrived just in time to hear the giant's taunt roll over them all. David listened, and if the army heard a challenge to their pride, the shepherd heard an insult to someone else. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine?" David said, his eyes never leaving the valley, "that he should defy the armies of the living God." His eldest brother Eliab flushed and scolded him, because sometimes fear wears the face of anger, and small courage looks like presumption to big armor. But David kept asking, and his questions like pebbles skipped from ear to ear until they reached a king. Saul was taller than most and dressed like a war song, yet his eyes were tired. He looked at this boy who smelled of pasture and asked the kind of question kings ask when their best men stay in their tents. David answered not like a boy, but like someone who had already learned what a valley feels like in the dark. "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Then he told the truth that had trained his hands, how once a lion padded into his life, and another time a bear, and both had learned that shepherds can be dangerous when lambs are at stake. "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." There are lessons that sit politely in books, and there are lessons that leave claw marks on your memory. David's faith had not grown under cheering crowds but under quiet skies, where only God and sheep could see. Courage often looks ordinary until the day it isn't. Saul, wrestling between fear and hope, did the thing men do when they do not know how to bless another's gift. He tried to replace it. He draped his own armor over David, cinched his own sword at David's hip, and sat back to watch a boy become a soldier. David took a step and almost became a statue. The weight pressed him into someone else's shape. He lifted his arms and shook his head. "I cannot go in these," he told Saul, "because I am not used to them." So he took them off. He stepped outside into the kind of air that lets a man breathe. He walked to the brook that cut the valley like a silver thread and knelt. The water slid past as if it were late for something. He trailed his fingers, then chose 5 smooth stones that had been rounded by 1,000 conversations with water. He slipped them into his shepherd's bag, where he kept the everyday tools of staying faithful, and he held the sling that had made the wilderness less wild. Back up the slope, men watched and whispered. Down in the valley, the giant watched and roared. Somewhere between them, the wind rearranged itself. Goliath lumbered forward with his shield-bearer, an unnecessary shadow in a scene that had already decided who was larger. He took in David young, ruddy eyes like a fresh morning and saw sticks and skin where he expected iron and scar. "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks?" he bellowed, and he cursed David by his gods. Rage does what it knows how to do, even when it cannot imagine what it does not know. David answered, and in his voice there was no tremble, only an echo of another voice that had been with him by night and noon. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin," he said, the words clear enough for both camps to hear. "But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." He did not stop there. because faith often completes its sentences. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And then the line that sits like an anchor in storms, all those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. 1 Samuel 17:45-47. Interpretation lives quietly inside such words. David was not banking on his aim. Though he had practiced, he was not trusting a river for smooth stones, though the river had done its steady work. He was not bargaining with odds or telling himself a brave story to drown out a larger voice. He was locating his place and Goliath's under God. The boy refused to see the giant as the biggest presence in the valley. That is faith, not the denial of giants, but the denial that giants get the last word. Goliath moved. David ran. The shepherd's feet seemed to know this ground, and they said as much by how they carried him. He reached into the bag, felt the cool oval of a stone that had taken years to become itself, and set it in the sling. The world narrowed to a circle and a point. He swung. He released, reaching into his bag and taking out a stone. He slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. Scripture tells it simply, as truth often does. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. Silence performed a miracle and became louder than shouting. Thousands of men learned to share a breath. David did not. He ran, because confidence does not idle when obedience opens a door. He drew the giant's own sword, the blade that had spent its life, saying no to other people's futures, and, with it, he finished what God had already started. 1 Samuel 17:51. The Philistines fled. Israel, who had been holding its fear like a full cup, finally spilled into courage and chased. Later there would be triumph songs, and later still questions from kings and the complicated weave of palace life. But in this hour the valley itself seemed to exhale, and the hills passed the story along, and the brook kept moving as if to say, water knows how to carry small things far. What happened in that space between one man's roar and another's running? Three things, braided like cords. First, memory did its work. Not the vague kind that smiles and forgets, but the kind that keeps its receipts. David remembered lions and bears, and not as legends about his own strength. He remembered rescue. The Lord who rescued me will rescue me, he had said. 1 Samuel 17:37. For some, memory is a museum, things behind glass. For David, memory was a tool belt. He walked into the valley with yesterday's faith sharpened for today. Second, authenticity took the field. Wearing Saul's armor would have made David look brave. It would also have made him someone else. The valley does not need your impression of a hero. It needs your obedience in the shape God already gave you. Shepherd's bag, sling, stones, none of it flattered. All of it fit. Third, perspective stayed put. Giants are loud. Fear likes to shout early and often. But David answered to a larger name. He did not deny the facts that stood in front of him. He simply placed them beside the truth that stood behind him. The battle is the Lord's. That sentence rearranged the valley. It still does. At dusk the hills softened, and the tents, which had felt like graves at dawn, now looked like homes again. The men spoke in quick voices, too eager to eat, too hungry to sleep. Somewhere a cup passed, and another, and then many. Men who had measured their days by a giant's taunt now measured them by a shepherd's sentence. A single story had entered them and refused to be a stranger. David stood at the edge of the camp and listened to the night return. Behind him, the sword that had shone like a threat lay silent. Before him, the future stretched like a road he could not see to the end of. He was still a boy, and already not only a boy. He touched the sling at his belt, as if it were the hand of a friend. He thought, perhaps, of the sheep bedded down in the hills, and wondered whether they had noticed how the day tasted different. We often imagine that courage feels like thunder loud in the chest, unmistakable, an applause our bones can hear. But more often it feels like walking with the tools we know, toward a thing that scares us, saying a name we trust. Shepherds who have done their work in small, hidden ways are simply less surprised when the valley is the same shape as the pasture, only louder. People tell the story as if it were about a boy beating a giant, and that is not wrong. But if you listen to the words that counted in the valley, you hear a different outline. A God who refuses to be defied. a God who takes insults personally when they land on his people, a God who delights in using what the world underestimates. The smooth stone did not fall from an unpracticed hand. It flew from a faith practiced in the ordinary. The giant did not trip on an accident. He was brought low by a truth older than the hills. Later, when voices rose in song, and later still when a king's jealousy would throw spears of its own, this day would not grow dim for David. It would not become a trophy to polish or a tale to exaggerate. It would remain what it had been in the moment, a place where God's name proved heavier than iron, and where one boy's confidence fit inside that name like a stone in a sling. If you lean close, you can still hear the brook in the story, saying what brooks say to anyone who listens. Be patient with small things. Let time smooth what you carry. The day will come when what seemed ordinary will fit perfectly in the moment God made for it. And when the giant steps forward and shouts, you will discover you have not been wasting your life in the hills. You have been getting ready. So the valley that began with a taunt ends with a lesson. Even the wind can tell you, the battle is the Lord. And the boy who ran into the roar did not become a legend that day. He became himself.